Today we will be looking at bankruptcy filing trends by chapter in the state of Alabama. To do this, we have about a dozen charts showing bankruptcy activity in the state going back to 1990. All of this data on filings comes from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. Okay, the first chart shows total filings by year from 1990 to 2015. And during this time, there have been over 800,000 bankruptcy cases filed in Alabama, which is quite a lot in a state that has less than 5 million people. But starting in the early 1990s, filings were under 30,000. By the late 1990s, a little bit over, and in the early 2000, filings had risen to over 40,000 per year. 2005, the year of bankruptcy reform, where we had a real surge in filings, got up to almost 48,000, dropped more than half the next year. Had 3 years of increases, and this was with the Great Recession, and then been down the last 5 years. The decline has only been 27% over that time, where nationwide they were down nearly one half. And right now, filings are about the same as where they were back in 1990 in the state of Alabama. Looking at filings relative to population, the southeast is generally very high. These are the states in red, and Alabama is particularly high at about 66% above the national average over the years. Looking at that year by year, you can see that every year Alabama has got substantially more filings relative to population than nationwide. Unlike the football teams in Alabama, the state has never been number one in bankruptcies. They've been second or third 17 out of the 26 years on this chart, but haven't made number one, which is probably a good thing. Okay, looking at Chapter 7 filings in the state, running around 10,000 per year in the early 1990s. This had risen to 20,000 per year just before bankruptcy reform, a big spike in 2005, 77% drop off the next year, and then a jump up over the next 3 years, and this was while the Great Recession was going on, although it never came close to getting back to where filings had been just before bankruptcy reform. And then we've had 6 straight years of declines where filings are down 37%, which is actually less of a decrease than most other states. And right now filings are about where they were in the mid-1990s, Chapter 7 filings. Chapter 11 filings in the state were much higher in the early 1990s, dropped off, and the same thing happened nationwide, but generally there have been little peaks around the recessions in the early 1990s, around 2001 and 2008, 2009, filings were up. Other than that, for a number of years, Chapter 11 filings have been in 100, 150 range in the state of Alabama, outside of recessions. Now looking at, let's see, Chapter 13 cases in Alabama, you can see that this is a much flatter chart. There's much less variation from year to year, and it rose from around 15,000 in the early 1990s to over 20,000 up to 2004. Dropped off a little bit after reform, back up to 20,000 a year at the height of the recession, and then have fallen back about 20% over the recent years. But most years you can see that Chapter 13 filings in the state are in the 15 to 20,000 case range. Now the percent of cases that are Chapter 13s nationwide has been kind of hugging the 30% line for since 1990 and actually before, where Alabama has been much closer to the 60% range during most of that time. And there is variation within the state. In the Northern District, about half the cases are Chapter 13, where in the Middle District it's around 80% now, and the Southern District about 72%. Okay. One thing to look at is next is the unemployment rate in Alabama by quarter, and this is kind of gives kind of a proxy of how the economy has gone over years. And you can see that in 2006, 2007, Alabama had a lower than average rate. During the recession, they were much higher from say 2009 to 2011, and then finally the rate has come back down, but in the last couple of years, not so much as the national rate. So there's a gap of about 1% between. Alabama is kind of stuck at about 6%, where nationwide it's closer to 5% right now. Now, looking at how far filings have come down since they peaked in September 2010, nationwide filings are down 49%. In Alabama, the decline is only 25%, which is the smallest of any state in the country. Puerto Rico is lower, but none of the 50 states have had a decline that modest over time. One thing you can see is that the declines have been lower generally in the southeast, where there's a lot of Chapter 11 filings, and really higher out in the west, particularly in states that were really hit hard by the recession. Quarter by quarter, you can see that most quarters, Alabama has had a less than 10% decline, and they've actually had an increase in the last year. Nationwide, the declines were between 10-15% for about 5 years, and the rate of decline is slowing down, but it's still going down nationwide, but up in Alabama. So in the first 6 months of this year, filings were up a couple percent in Alabama, still down about 6% nationwide. I think the outlook probably is for continued modest increases in filings in Alabama in the next couple of years. The caseload will probably be in the 25 to 30,000 range, but it's not likely that they're going to hit the 40,000 or above annual filings that we saw from 2000 to 2005, unless there's another recession or some change to the bankruptcy laws. So that concludes our look at bankruptcy filings in Alabama. For more statistical information and other information on bankruptcy, be sure to visit the newsroom section of the ABI website, available at www.abi.org.